There comes a point in life when you stop asking, "How can I make this relationship work?" And you start asking, "Is this relationship actually good for me?" Maybe nothing dramatic happened. You simply got older. You experienced enough disappointment, enough heartbreak, enough one-sided relationships, enough moments where you ignored your own feelings just to keep someone else happy. And somewhere along the way, something changed. You realized that love isn't supposed to require you to constantly abandon yourself. Because after 50, many people begin looking at relationships differently. Not because they stop believing in love, but because they understand something they may not have understood when they were younger. Time feels different when you've lived enough of it. Psychologist Laura Carstensen's socio-emotional selectivity theory suggests that as people perceive their future time as more limited, they tend to place greater value on emotionally meaningful relationships and experiences. In simple terms, you may become less interested in relationships that consume your energy, and more interested in relationships that actually add something meaningful to your life. And that's where the standards begin to change. Here are 7 things people often become much less willing to tolerate in relationships after 50. Number 1. Constant emotional uncertainty. When you're younger, uncertainty can sometimes feel exciting. You wonder, does she really like me? Why hasn't he called? Where is this relationship going? You analyze the text. You analyze the silence. You analyze the change in tone. And somehow, you become more invested because you don't know where you stand. But eventually, uncertainty stops feeling exciting. It starts feeling exhausting. And you begin realizing something. Confusion is emotionally expensive. If someone cares about you, you shouldn't have to become a detective. You shouldn't spend your evenings trying to decode 3 words in a text message. You shouldn't constantly wonder whether you're wanted. And you shouldn't have to earn basic emotional security. This doesn't mean healthy relationships never contain uncertainty. They do. People get busy. People misunderstand each other. People have bad days. But there's a difference between temporary uncertainty and a relationship that consistently keeps you guessing. After enough life experience, many people begin valuing something they may have overlooked when they were younger. Peace. Not because peace is boring. Because peace gives you room to actually live. Number 2. Being taken for granted. At the beginning of a relationship, small things matter. A thank you. A thoughtful message. Someone remembering what matters to you. Someone noticing when you're tired. Someone making an effort simply because they care. But familiarity can slowly turn into assumption. Your kindness becomes expected. Your effort becomes invisible. Your presence becomes guaranteed. And eventually, you realize something uncomfortable. You're not being appreciated anymore. You're being relied upon. There's a difference. Appreciation recognizes what you give. Being taken for granted simply expects you to keep giving. And this is where relationships can become quietly one-sided. You keep showing up. You keep understanding. You keep forgiving. You keep making excuses. And because you can handle it, the other person assumes you always will. But eventually you start asking, why am I constantly proving that I care while they barely have to show it? A healthy relationship doesn't require perfectly equal effort every single day. Life doesn't work that way. Sometimes one person carries more because the other is struggling. That's normal. The problem is when temporary imbalance becomes the permanent structure of the relationship. After 50, many people become less willing to spend their time trying to convince someone to notice their value. They don't necessarily need grand romantic gestures. They want reciprocity. If I care about you, I want to feel that you care about me too. Number 3. Disrespect disguised as personality. You've probably heard it before. Someone speaks harshly. They insult you. They dismiss your feelings. They repeatedly cross your boundaries. And when you finally say something, they respond, "That's just how I am." But personality isn't an excuse for repeatedly hurting someone. Being direct isn't the same as being cruel. Being independent isn't the same as being inconsiderate. Being passionate isn't the same as being emotionally aggressive. And having a strong personality doesn't give someone permission to disrespect you. Sometimes people tolerate this because they believe love requires acceptance of everything. It doesn't. You can accept that someone has flaws, without accepting behavior that repeatedly damages you. And there's another psychological shift that can happen with age. You become less interested in dating someone's potential, and more interested in observing their pattern. Because anybody can promise to change. The real question is, what do they consistently do? If someone keeps showing you the same behavior, eventually, the behavior is more informative than the explanation. Number 4. A relationship you have to carry alone. A relationship can survive difficult periods. It can survive mistakes. It can survive arguments. What it usually cannot survive indefinitely is one person doing all the emotional work. One person initiates every conversation. One person plans everything. One person apologizes. One person tries to repair every argument. One person keeps asking, "Are we okay?" while the other person simply waits to be pursued. Eventually, that becomes exhausting. And here's the important distinction. Love isn't measured by effort on one perfect day. It's revealed through patterns. Someone can be imperfect and still be deeply invested. They can forget something, make mistakes, have difficult periods. But over time, you can usually see whether they're trying. And that's what matters. Because when you're always the person repairing the relationship, you eventually stop feeling like a partner. You start feeling like the relationship's maintenance department. And after 50, many people begin asking a much simpler question. If I stopped doing all the work, would this relationship still exist? If the answer is no, that's information. Number 5. Walking on eggshells. There's a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from never knowing which version of someone you're going to get. You say something harmless. They become angry. You ask a question. They become defensive. You express a need. Suddenly you're accused of starting an argument. Eventually, you stop speaking honestly. You edit yourself. You avoid certain subjects. You monitor their mood. You think before every sentence. You keep the peace. But there's a hidden cost. You may have peace in the relationship, but you've lost your freedom inside it. That's not emotional safety. That's emotional management. And many people eventually realize they don't want to spend the later chapters of their lives constantly managing another person's reactions. Healthy love doesn't mean never disagreeing. It means disagreement doesn't destroy your sense of safety. You should be able to say, "I don't agree. I didn't like that. I need something different. Without feeling like you've just triggered an emotional earthquake. Because a relationship isn't truly peaceful when one person has to stay silent to keep it peaceful. Number 6. Staying because you're afraid to be alone. This may be the hardest one to admit. Sometimes people don't stay because they're happy. They stay because leaving feels terrifying. They think, what if I never find anyone else? What if I'm too old to start again? What will people think? What if being alone is worse? And there's a psychological trap hiding inside those questions. Sometimes we focus so heavily on what we might lose by leaving, that we stop asking what we're already losing by staying. Behavioral economics calls one part of this tendency loss aversion. It's our tendency to give losses more psychological weight than equivalent gains. And another related trap is the sunk cost effect. The longer you've invested, the harder it can feel to walk away. Years, memories, sacrifices, a home, a family history, shared experiences. You may think, I've already given this relationship so much. I can't just leave now. But the past investment cannot be recovered by sacrificing more of your future. And this is where growing older can create a powerful realization. Being alone isn't automatically the worst outcome. Sometimes being alone is painful. But being with someone who consistently makes you feel lonely can be even more painful. You don't need to choose a relationship simply because someone is available. You can choose companionship because you genuinely want that person in your life. That's a very different kind of choice. Number 7. Losing yourself to keep the relationship. This may be the biggest one. It rarely happens overnight. You stop doing the things you enjoy. You see your friends less. You stop expressing certain opinions. You avoid subjects that cause conflict. You change your personality to make the relationship easier. You become whatever version of yourself seems easiest for the other person to love. And because it happens gradually, you may not even notice. Until one day, you look at your life and think, I don't recognize myself anymore. Psychologists Arthur and Elaine Aron developed self-expansion theory, which describes romantic relationships as one way people can expand their sense of self through new experiences, perspectives, abilities, and ways of seeing the world. And that gives us an interesting way to think about healthy love. A good relationship should give your life more dimensions, not fewer. It should allow you to become more yourself, not less. You can become part of a couple without disappearing as an individual. You can love someone deeply, without abandoning your friends, your interests, your opinions, your boundaries, your identity. Because healthy love creates a we, without destroying the I. And perhaps that's one of the most valuable things experience can teach you. You know yourself better. You know what drains you. You know what brings you peace. You know what you can forgive. And you know what you simply cannot live with anymore. Maybe people don't necessarily become harder to love after 50. Maybe they become harder to manipulate with the idea of love. Because they've seen enough to know. Attention isn't commitment. Chemistry isn't compatibility. Apologies aren't change. And being wanted isn't the same thing as being valued. That's why the standards can change. Not because someone becomes cold. Not because they stop believing in romance. But because they finally understand the cost of settling. And there's something powerful about that. When you were younger, You may have asked, will this person choose me? Later in life, the question can become, would I choose this person again? That's a completely different question. Because now you're not simply asking whether someone wants you. You're asking whether their presence actually makes your life better. Whether you feel safe around them. Whether you can be yourself. Whether effort goes both ways. Whether conflict can be handled with respect. Whether the relationship gives you peace, instead of constantly taking it. And perhaps that's what growing older teaches us about love. You don't necessarily need someone who makes your heart race every day. You need someone who makes you feel safe being yourself. Someone whose actions match their words. Someone who respects your boundaries. Someone who contributes instead of constantly taking. Someone who doesn't make you question whether you matter. Because after a certain point, you realize something incredibly important. You don't have unlimited time. And that changes the question. You're no longer asking, can I make this relationship work? You're asking, is this the kind of relationship I want to spend the rest of my life living? And sometimes, that question changes everything. Because maybe the most important thing you stop tolerating after 50 isn't another person's behavior. Maybe it's your own willingness to betray yourself just to keep someone else. And if you've reached that point, you may finally understand that walking away from the wrong relationship isn't giving up on love. Sometimes, it's making room for a healthier version of it.